The gunshot that tore through the evening air of Promise Creek sent Elizabeth Galloway scurrying to her window, fingers trembling as they clutched the faded lace curtain. Wyoming Territory, 1876, was no place for a woman alone, especially not a widow of just 3 months. Hannah Greene pressed her face against the fabric, hoping it might shield her from whatever violence had erupted on the dusty Main Street. Through the thin material, she could make out the silhouettes of men scrambling for cover as another shot rang out. The last rays of the setting sun cast long shadows across the boardwalk, making it difficult to discern friend from foe. She had come to Promise Creek with her husband Thomas 5 years ago, full of hope and dreams of a prosperous future. Now, at 26, she stood alone in the small house they had built together, his memory haunting every corner. The fever had taken him quickly, leaving her with nothing but a small plot of land, a house in need of repairs, and a crushing loneliness that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. Another shot echoed, closer this time, followed by the sound of boots pounding against the wooden porch. Hannah retreated from the window, her heart hammering against her ribs. Someone was at her door. The knock came, urgent but not forceful. "Madam, are you in there? I need help." Hannah hesitated, one hand pressed against her throat. The voice was deep, unfamiliar. In Promise Creek, strangers often meant trouble. "Please, madam, I'm not looking to cause any harm." Something in the man's tone, desperation mingled with sincerity, compelled Hannah to approach the door. "Who are you?" she called, keeping her voice steady despite her fear. "Lucas Everett, madam." "I'm new in town. Got caught in something that ain't my doing. I swear on my mother's grave I mean you no harm, but there are men out there who mean me plenty." Hannah's hand hovered over the latch. Thomas had always said her trusting nature would be her undoing, but what choice did she have? If this man was telling the truth and she turned him away, his blood would be on her hands. With a deep breath, she unlocked the door and opened it just enough to peer through. The man on her porch was tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hat pulled low over his eyes. Blood stained the sleeve of his shirt. "You're hurt," she said, opening the door wider. "It's just a graze," he replied, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the street. "I'll be fine if I can just lay low for a spell." Hannah stepped back, allowing him inside before quickly closing and locking the door behind him. She gestured toward the kitchen. "Sit. I'll tend to that arm." Lucas Everett moved with the easy grace of a man accustomed to hard work, despite the injury. He removed his hat as he entered her kitchen, revealing thick brown hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes, a clear blue that reminded Hannah of the summer sky, watched her cautiously. "I'm sorry to impose, madam. I wouldn't have knocked if I had anywhere else to go." Hannah busied herself gathering clean cloths and the bottle of whiskey Thomas had kept for medicinal purposes. "What happened out there?" Lucas sank into the chair with a sigh. "I arrived in town this afternoon looking for work, was having a quiet drink at the saloon when a card game turned ugly. One fella accused another of cheating, and before I knew it, guns were drawn. I tried to step away, but one of them decided I was taking sides." Hannah returned to the table with her supplies. "Remove your shirt, please." She kept her tone professional, though she couldn't help the slight warmth that crept into her cheeks. Lucas complied, wincing as he pulled the bloodied fabric away from the wound. Hannah assessed the damage, a deep furrow along his upper arm where the bullet had grazed him. It would need cleaning and bandaging, but wasn't life-threatening. "You're lucky," she said, pouring whiskey onto a clean cloth. "This will sting." Lucas hissed through his teeth when she pressed the cloth to his wound but made no move to pull away. "Thank you for taking me in, Mrs. Greene." "Hannah Greene," she replied, focusing on her task rather than on the firm muscles beneath her fingers. "My husband Thomas passed away 3 months ago. I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Greene." Hannah nodded, wrapping a bandage around his arm. "It was pneumonia, quick at least." She secured the bandage with a knot. "There, that should hold." Lucas looked at her work with appreciation. "You have a healing touch, Mrs. Greene." Outside, voices called to one another as men searched the streets. Hannah moved to the window, careful to stay hidden behind the curtain. She could see several men with lanterns moving from building to building. Her pulse quickened. "They're looking for you," she whispered. Lucas came to stand beside her, peering through the curtain as well. "Carson and his boys, they're not the law, though they sometimes pretend to be. They run this town through fear." Hannah's fingers tightened on the curtain. "I know who they are. They came by after Thomas died, suggesting I might need protection. I sent them away." Lucas looked at her with newfound respect. "That was brave, or foolish," Hannah replied. "They've left me alone so far, but I know they want my land. It's small, but it has the best access to the creek." A shout from outside drew their attention back to the street. A group of men had gathered directly across from Hannah's house. One of them, a tall figure with a silver-trimmed black hat, pointed toward her porch. "They're coming here," Lucas said, stepping back from the window. "I should go. I won't bring trouble to your door." Hannah grabbed his wrist, surprising herself with the boldness of the gesture. "No. There's no back door and they'll catch you for sure. Hide in the bedroom, quickly." Lucas hesitated for only a moment before nodding. Hannah led him to the small room at the back of the house, pointing to the space beneath the bed. "It's not dignified, but it's the best I can offer." "I've slept in worse places, Mrs. Greene," Lucas said with a hint of a smile that transformed his solemn face. As he disappeared under the bed, Hannah hurried back to the main room, smoothing her skirts and taking several deep breaths to calm herself. The knock, when it came, was not a request but a demand. Hannah opened the door to find Silas Carson himself standing on her porch, flanked by two of his men. His thin lips curved into what he likely thought was a charming smile. "Evening, Mrs. Greene. Sorry to disturb you at this hour." "Mr. Carson," Hannah acknowledged stiffly. "What can I do for you?" "We're looking for a man. Tall fellow, brown hair, blue shirt. Shot Billy in the saloon and ran. You haven't seen anyone fitting that description, have you?" Hannah held his gaze steadily. "I've been home all evening, Mr. Carson. Alone, as usual." Carson's eyes narrowed as he looked past her into the house. "You wouldn't mind if we had a look around, would you? For your own safety, of course. This man is dangerous." Hannah's throat went dry, but she didn't let her fear show. "I mind very much, Mr. Carson. This is my home, and I haven't invited you inside." One of Carson's men spat tobacco juice onto her porch, mighty particular for a woman living alone. Carson raised a hand to silence him. "Now, Mrs. Greene, I understand you valuing your privacy. But this is a matter of town safety. The man we're looking for is a killer." Hannah knew he was lying. Lucas Everett didn't strike her as a killer, but Carson certainly did. "If I see anyone suspicious, I'll be sure to let Sheriff Patterson know." At the mention of the sheriff, Carson's expression darkened. "Patterson's out of town until tomorrow. We're looking after things in his absence." "Then I'll speak to him when he returns," Hannah replied firmly. "Good night, gentlemen." She began to close the door, but Carson's boot shot out, preventing it from shutting. "I don't think you understand your situation, Mrs. Greene. This land of yours, it would be a shame if something happened to it. Or to you." Hannah's pulse raced, but years of hardship had taught her to stand her ground. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Carson?" "Just offering friendly advice," he replied, removing his foot. "We'll be watching. Good evening." Hannah closed the door, locking it firmly before leaning against it, her legs suddenly weak. She waited until she heard the men's footsteps retreat before returning to the bedroom. "You can come out now," she whispered. Lucas emerged from under the bed, dust clinging to his hair and clothes. "You stood up to Carson," he said with undisguised admiration. "Most people in this town won't do that." "I had to," Hannah replied simply. "Once you start giving in to men like that, they take everything." Lucas brushed the dust from his clothes. "I should go. They'll be watching your house now." "You can't leave tonight. They'll catch you for certain," Hannah argued. "Stay until morning. I can help you slip out at first light when they might be less vigilant." Lucas looked at her with a mix of gratitude and concern. "You're risking a lot for a stranger." Hannah moved to the window, parting the curtain slightly to check the street. A figure loitered in the shadows across the way. "Perhaps, but my husband always said doing the right thing was rarely easy." She let the curtain fall back into place. "You should get some rest." "You can take Thomas's side of the bed, I'll sleep in the chair." "I couldn't possibly, I insist," Hannah interrupted. "You're injured and you need proper rest if you're going to travel tomorrow." Lucas looked as though he wanted to argue further but finally nodded. "Thank you, Mrs. Greene. I won't forget your kindness." As Hannah settled into the wooden rocking chair by the window, watching the street through a gap in the curtains, she wondered what had possessed her to help this man. Perhaps it was loneliness, or perhaps it was simply that Lucas Everett had kind eyes in a world where kindness had become increasingly rare. Whatever the reason, for the first time since Thomas's death, she didn't feel quite so alone. Morning came with pale light filtering through the curtains. Hannah had dozed fitfully in the chair, waking at every creak and whisper of wind. Lucas still slept, his breathing deep and even. She allowed herself a moment to study him, the strong line of his jaw, the furrow between his brows that didn't quite smooth out even in sleep. She rose quietly, moving to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. The smell of coffee brewing and bacon frying soon filled the small house, and Hannah heard the creak of the bed as Lucas stirred. He appeared in the doorway, his hair tousled from sleep, his injured arm held carefully at his side. "Good morning, Mrs. Greene. That smells wonderful." Hannah gestured to the table. "Sit. You should eat before you go." Lucas took a seat, watching as she moved efficiently around the kitchen. "I can't remember the last time someone cooked for me." "A man on his own must get used to fending for himself," Hannah replied, placing a plate before him. "Been that way most of my life," Lucas admitted, taking a sip of coffee. "My father died when I was 16. My mother followed a year later. Been drifting ever since, taking work where I can find it." Hannah sat across from him with her own plate. "What kind of work do you do?" "Anything honest," Lucas replied. "I'm good with horses, better with cattle. Worked as a ranch hand mostly, but I've tried my hand at mining and even clerking in a general store for a spell." "What brought you to Promise Creek?" Lucas's expression grew thoughtful. "Heard there might be work at the Taylor Ranch. They're expanding their herd from what I understand." Hannah nodded. "The Taylors are good people, fair employers." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Lucas spoke again. "I checked the street from the window. There's still a man watching your house." Hannah's stomach tightened. "Carson won't give up easily. He wants my land." "Why is it so important to him?" "My property has frontage on Promise Creek where it's deep enough for cattle to water year-round. The surrounding land is mostly owned by small farmers who won't sell to Carson. If he had my land, he could control access to the best water for miles." Lucas frowned. "And with water rights, he could squeeze out the smaller ranchers." "Exactly." Hannah gathered their empty plates. "Sheriff Patterson tries to keep Carson in check, but he's just one man against Carson's whole outfit." Lucas stood, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injury. "I should go before I cause you more trouble." Hannah moved to the window, peering cautiously through the curtain. "Wait. Sheriff Patterson is riding into town. If we can get you to him before Carson's men intercept you, he might be able to help." Lucas joined her at the window, standing close enough that Hannah could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Through the thin fabric, they watched as the sheriff dismounted in front of his office across the street. "I could make a run for it," Lucas suggested. "Carson's man would see you immediately," Hannah replied, thinking quickly. "But I have another idea." She hurried to Thomas's closet, pulling out a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat. "Put these on. We'll walk out together as if you're escorting me to the general store. Keep your head down and your arm hidden." Lucas looked uncertain. "It's risky. If Carson's men recognize me, they'll be looking for a lone man, not one accompanying a lady," Hannah reasoned, already tying the ribbons of her bonnet under her chin. "And the sheriff's office is only 50 yards away." Lucas donned the coat and hat, the latter casting his face in shadow. "You're a remarkable woman, Mrs. Greene." Hannah felt her cheeks warm at the compliment. "I'm just doing what's right." She gathered her shawl and a basket, completing the illusion that they were simply heading out for morning errands. With a deep breath, she opened the front door and they stepped onto the porch together. Lucas offered her his good arm. "Shall we, Mrs. Greene?" Hannah placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, acutely aware of the firm muscle beneath the coat. They descended the steps and began walking casually toward the sheriff's office. Carson's man straightened from his lounging position against a hitching post, his eyes narrowing as he watched them. Hannah kept her gaze forward, her steps measured despite the rapid beating of her heart. They had nearly reached the sheriff's office when a shout rang out from down the street. "That's him! That's the man from the saloon!" Hannah felt Lucas tense beside her. 4 men were rushing toward them, Silas Carson at the lead, his hand hovering near his holstered pistol. "Run for the sheriff's office," Lucas urged, pushing her gently ahead. "I'll hold them off." "I'm not leaving you," Hannah insisted, gripping his arm tighter. Before Carson and his men could reach them, the sheriff's door swung open. Sheriff Patterson stepped out, his weathered face taking in the scene with a frown. "What's all this commotion about?" Carson slowed his approach, his expression calculating. "Sheriff, we've been hunting a dangerous man who shot Billy Johnson last night, and this woman's been harboring him." Sheriff Patterson's gaze shifted to Lucas and Hannah. "That true, Mrs. Greene? You harboring a criminal?" Hannah stood tall, meeting the sheriff's eyes directly. "This man took refuge in my home last night, yes. He was injured when Carson's men shot at him for no reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time." "She's lying," Carson spat. "This drifter shot Billy in cold blood." "That's not what Maggie at the saloon told me when I rode in," Sheriff Patterson replied calmly. "She said Billy drew first after accusing this gentleman of cheating, despite having no proof. Said the stranger here only returned fire in self-defense, and his shot just grazed Billy's shoulder." Carson's face darkened with anger. "Billy works for me. His word isn't worth much in this town, and you know it," Patterson interrupted. "Now, I suggest you and your boys head back to whatever rock you crawled out from under and leave these folks alone." For a tense moment, it seemed Carson might challenge the sheriff. His hand twitched near his gun and Hannah held her breath. But finally, with a curse, he backed down. "This isn't over," he growled, shooting a venomous look at Hannah and Lucas before stalking away, his men following reluctantly behind. Sheriff Patterson watched them go before turning his attention back to Hannah and Lucas. "Mrs. Greene, would you and your friend like to come inside?" Once in the safety of the sheriff's office, Lucas introduced himself properly and explained the events of the previous night. Sheriff Patterson listened attentively, nodding occasionally. "Carson's been pushing his boundaries lately," the sheriff said when Lucas had finished. "Getting bolder." "I'm sorry you got caught in the middle of it, Mr. Everett." "What happens now?" Hannah asked, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Sheriff Patterson stroked his mustache thoughtfully. "Billy Johnson's not pressing charges, according to Maggie, says he was in the wrong." "That means you're free to go, Mr. Everett, but I'd advise caution. Carson doesn't take kindly to being crossed, and Mrs. Greene?" Lucas asked. "Carson threatened her last night," the sheriff's expression darkened. "Did he now?" Hannah recounted Carson's veiled threats regarding her property. As she spoke, she noticed Lucas's jaw tightening, his eyes glinting with anger. "I'll have a word with Carson," Sheriff Patterson promised, "but I can't be everywhere at once, and his men outnumber me considerably." "I appreciate whatever you can do, Sheriff," Hannah said, rising to her feet. "Thank you for your help." Lucas stood as well, extending his hand to the sheriff. "I'm grateful, sir." Outside, the morning sun had risen higher, casting short shadows on the dusty street. Hannah and Lucas walked slowly back toward her house, both lost in thought. "I should still leave town," Lucas said finally. "As long as I'm here, Carson will use me as an excuse to bother you." Hannah stopped walking, turning to face him. "And where will you go?" Lucas shrugged. "I'll try the Taylor Ranch like I planned. If that doesn't pan out, I'll move on. I'm used to it." Hannah looked down at her hands, suddenly reluctant to part ways with this man she had known for less than a day. "You need a few days to heal properly before you start working with cattle." Lucas studied her face. Mrs. Greene, Hannah, she interrupted. Please call me Hannah. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Hannah, I don't want to impose on your kindness any further. It's not an imposition, she replied quickly. My house needs repairs. The roof leaks in 3 places and the porch railing is rotting. Thomas always meant to fix them, but… She trailed off, swallowing hard. I can provide room and board in exchange for the work. Lucas's blue eyes searched hers, and Hannah felt her cheeks warm under his scrutiny. Are you sure? Carson won't like it. I'm tired of making decisions based on what Silas Carson might like, Hannah said with sudden fierceness. This is my home, my land. I choose who stays and who goes. Lucas's smile widened, transforming his entire face. In that case, I accept your offer, though I should warn you I charge extra for fixing leaky roofs. Hannah found herself smiling in return, the first genuine smile in months. I'll keep that in mind, Mr. Everett. Lucas, he corrected gently. If I'm to call you Hannah. Lucas, she repeated. Liking the way his name felt on her tongue, they resumed walking, and Hannah became acutely aware of how his presence beside her made her feel both unsettled and strangely secure. It had been so long since she had felt anything other than grief and fear. This new feeling, whatever it was not unwelcome. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Lucas proved to be as good with his hands as he claimed, repairing the porch railing on his first day despite his injured arm. By the end of the week, he had patched the leaky roof and fixed the squeaking floorboards in the kitchen. Hannah found herself enjoying the company, the sound of hammering and sawing filling the previously silent house. She took pleasure in preparing meals for someone again, and their conversations over dinner became the highlight of her days. Lucas told her stories of his travels, the majestic mountains of Colorado, the vast plains of Kansas, the bustling streets of Denver. Hannah, who had never ventured far from Promise Creek, listened with rapt attention. In turn, she shared memories of her life with Thomas, their journey west from Illinois, the early struggles of establishing their home, the dreams they had shared of a family that never materialized due to nature's cruel whims. You still miss him, Lucas observed one evening as they sat on the newly repaired porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks. Hannah nodded, her hands cradling a cup of tea. I do. He was a good man, kind and steady, the type of person you could always rely on. Lucas was quiet for a moment. I've never stayed in one place long enough to build that kind of life. Always moving on to the next job, the next town. No family anywhere, Hannah asked. No family, no home, just the open road and whatever work I can find. Lucas leaned back in his chair, his gaze distant. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to have roots somewhere, people who'd miss me if I didn't come back. Hannah studied his profile in the fading light. Perhaps you just haven't found the right place yet. His eyes met hers, holding her gaze for a long moment. Perhaps, he agreed softly. The moment was broken by the sound of approaching horses. Hannah tensed, setting down her cup as 3 riders came into view. Silas Carson rode at the front, his face set in lines of smug determination. Lucas stood, positioning himself between Hannah and the approaching men. Stay behind me, he said quietly. The riders stopped at the edge of Hannah's property. Carson dismounted, adjusting his gun belt as he approached the porch. Mrs. Greene, he called, tipping his hat with mock politeness. I see your house guest is still with you, quite the extended stay for a man who was just passing through. Hannah rose from her chair, moving to stand beside Lucas rather than behind him. Mr. Carson, what brings you to my property? Carson's smile didn't reach his eyes, just being neighborly. Checking on the widow, it's come to my attention that you might be having financial difficulties. Hannah frowned. My finances are none of your concern. Oh, but they are, Carson countered, climbing the steps to the porch. You see, I've acquired the note on your property from the bank in Cheyenne. Hannah felt the blood drain from her face. Thomas had taken a small loan to expand their land 3 years ago with payments due quarterly. She had been careful to make each payment on time. "That's impossible," she said, her voice steady despite her shock. "The loan is in good standing." Carson pulled a folded document from his pocket. "The bank was quite willing to sell the note when I offered a premium. Business is business, after all." Lucas stepped forward, his posture tense. "What are you playing at, Carson?" "Not playing at all, Everett, just making a sound investment." Carson turned his attention back to Hannah. "The terms of the note allow me to call it due in full at my discretion, which I'm doing now." Hannah's mind raced. The remaining balance on the loan was substantial, far more than she had saved. "You know I can't pay that immediately." Carson's smile widened. "I thought that might be the case. Fortunately, I'm prepared to offer an alternative. Sell me your land for a fair price and we'll consider the debt settled." "Fair according to who?" Lucas demanded. "Stay out of this, Drifter," Carson snapped. "This is between Mrs. Greene and myself." Hannah's hands curled into fists at her sides. "You've wanted my land from the beginning." "This is just another tactic to force me to sell." "Call it what you will," Carson replied with a shrug. "You have until the end of the week to decide. Either pay the note in full or accept my offer." He tipped his hat again. "Good evening, Mrs. Greene. Consider carefully." A woman alone has few options in this territory. As Carson and his men rode away, Hannah sank back into her chair, her legs suddenly unable to support her. Lucas knelt beside her, his face etched with concern. "Hannah, are you all right?" She shook her head, tears threatening despite her best efforts to contain them. "He's going to take everything. Thomas and I worked so hard for this place, and now—" Lucas took her hand in his calloused thumb brushing across her knuckles. "We'll figure something out." "How much is left on the note?" $800, Hannah whispered. "I have perhaps 100 saved." Lucas was quiet for a long moment, his hand still holding hers. "I have some money, not enough, but it's a start." Hannah looked up, startled. "Lucas, no." "I couldn't possibly. Let me help," he insisted. "We still have a few days. There must be a way." Hannah gazed out at her land, the small vegetable garden she tended, the apple trees Thomas had planted, the creek burbling at the edge of the property. The thought of losing it all made her chest ache with a pain more intense than any physical wound. "Even if we could raise the money," she said quietly, "Carson won't stop. He'll find another way to come after my land." Lucas's jaw set with determination. "Then we need to find a way to stop him for good." The next morning, they rode into town together, heading straight for the sheriff's office. Sheriff Patterson listened gravely as Hannah explained Carson's latest maneuver. "Buying up notes is legal, though underhanded," the sheriff said when she had finished. "I'm not sure there's much I can do from a legal standpoint." "There must be something," Lucas pressed. "Carson's been threatening Hannah, trying to intimidate her into selling." Sheriff Patterson scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Threats are another matter, but it would be your word against his, and in these parts Carson has influence with the circuit judge." Hannah's hopes sank further. "So there's nothing to be done." "I didn't say that," the sheriff replied, leaning forward in his chair. "Carson's been walking a fine line for years, pushing boundaries, bending rules, but always careful to keep his worst behavior just this side of legal. But men like that eventually make mistakes." Lucas's eyes narrowed. "What kind of mistake are we talking about?" "The kind that might be encouraged with the right bait," Sheriff Patterson said meaningfully. "Carson wants Hannah's land badly enough to take risks, if he were to cross the line in a way that couldn't be ignored." Hannah understood the sheriff's implication. "You want to trap him?" Patterson nodded slowly. "It's risky. Carson's not a man to be underestimated, but if he were caught breaking the law, really breaking it, not just bending it, even the circuit judge would have to act." Lucas turned to Hannah, his expression serious. "It's your decision. This is your land, your fight." Hannah thought of Thomas, of the life they had built together, of the promises they had made to each other. She thought of the future she had imagined here, even after his death. And she thought of Carson, of his smug certainty that he could take whatever he wanted simply because she was a woman alone. Except she wasn't alone anymore. She looked at Lucas, drawing strength from the quiet confidence in his blue eyes. "What do we need to do?" she asked the sheriff. Patterson outlined his plans, simple but dangerous. They would let word reach Carson that Hannah was considering his offer but wanted more money. She would ask to meet him at her house that evening to negotiate. The sheriff would be hidden inside, ready to witness and intervene if Carson revealed his true colors. Carson's been careful about what he says in public, Patterson explained. But in private, with someone he considers vulnerable, he might not be so guarded. Lucas frowned. I don't like Hannah facing him alone, even for a few minutes. She won't be alone, Patterson assured him. I'll be in the next room and you'll be outside, watching through the window. At the first sign of trouble, we move in. That evening, Hannah paced her small living room, her nerves stretched tight as a bowstring. Sheriff Patterson was concealed in the bedroom, the door open just enough to hear the conversation. Lucas waited outside, positioned beneath the window where he could see and hear everything. The sound of approaching horses made Hannah freeze. She smoothed her skirts, took a deep breath, and moved to the door when the knock came. Carson stood on her porch alone, though Hannah could see his men waiting with the horses at a distance. His smile was predatory as she invited him inside. "Mrs. Greene," he said, removing his hat. "I'm pleased you've decided to be reasonable." Hannah gestured to the chair across from hers. "I'm considering your offer, Mr. Carson, but I believe the price should reflect the true value of my land." Carson sat, placing his hat on the table between them. "And what do you consider to be the true value?" "Double what you've offered," Hannah stated firmly. "This land has the best water access for miles. You know that as well as I do." Carson chuckled, the sound devoid of humor. "You have a high opinion of your property, but let's be honest, you're in no position to negotiate. You can't pay the note, and no one else in town will buy your land for fear of crossing me." Hannah met his gaze without flinching. "Then perhaps I'll just wait for Sheriff Patterson to investigate how you acquired the note in the first place. I find it odd that the bank would sell a loan that was in good standing." A flicker of anger crossed Carson's face. "Patterson can investigate all he wants. Money talks, Mrs. Greene. I offered the bank a premium and they took it. It's perfectly legal." "Is threatening a widow legal as well?" Hannah challenged. Carson leaned forward, his previous pretense of civility dropping away. "Listen carefully. I will have this land one way or another. If not through this note, then by other means. It would be a shame if your house caught fire some night. Accidents happen, especially to women living alone." Hannah's heart raced, but she kept her expression neutral. "That sounds very much like a threat, Mr. Carson." "Call it whatever you like," he replied, rising to his feet. "You have until tomorrow to accept my original offer. After that, I can't guarantee your safety. This territory is a dangerous place. People disappear all the time." Before Hannah could respond, the bedroom door swung open fully, and Sheriff Patterson stepped out, his hand resting on his holstered gun. "I believe I've heard enough, Carson." Carson's face contorted with rage as he whirled to face the sheriff. His hand moved toward his gun, but Patterson was faster, drawing his weapon and aiming it squarely at Carson's chest. "I wouldn't," the sheriff warned. "Threatening a citizen's life and property is a serious offense." The front door burst open as Lucas entered, his own gun drawn. Outside, Carson's men remained by the horses, unaware of the confrontation unfolding inside. Carson's eyes darted between the sheriff and Lucas, calculating his odds. Finally, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "This proves nothing," he snarled. "It's my word against hers." "And mine," Sheriff Patterson countered. "And Mr. Everett's, 3 witnesses to your threats. That's enough for the circuit judge, even one who owes you favors." Hannah stood, her legs steadier than she had expected. "And what about the note?" Sheriff Patterson smiled grimly. "Interesting thing about that. I took the liberty of sending a telegram to the bank in Cheyenne this morning. Seems their president was quite surprised to hear they'd sold your loan, considering he never authorized such a transaction." The color drained from Carson's face. "You can't prove. The bank president is already on his way here to investigate. Should arrive on tomorrow's stage," Patterson interrupted. I wonder what else he might discover about your financial dealings, Carson." Within minutes, the sheriff had Carson in handcuffs and was leading him outside to explain the situation to his confused men. Hannah watched from the porch as Patterson mounted his horse, Carson secured on another, and the entire group rode back toward town. Lucas came to stand beside her, his gun now holstered. "Are you all right?" Hannah nodded, suddenly exhausted but relieved. "Yes." "Do you think it's over?" "Carson won't be bothering you again," Lucas assured her. "Forgery, threats, attempted intimidation, he'll be facing serious charges. And from what the sheriff said, the bank investigation might uncover even more." Hannah leaned against the porch railing, gazing out at her land as twilight settled over it. "I still can't believe we did it." Lucas stood close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. "You did it, Hannah. You stood up to him, you refused to be intimidated." She turned to look at him, studying his face in the gathering darkness. "I couldn't have done it without you." Lucas's expression softened. "You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." They stood in comfortable silence for a long moment, the cicadas beginning their evening chorus around them. "What will you do now?" Hannah asked finally. "Will you still try for work at the Taylor Ranch?" Lucas gazed out at the land, his profile outlined against the darkening sky. "I've been thinking about that. This place needs a lot of work, more than just fixing a few leaks and a porch railing. The fences need mending, the barn could use reinforcing before winter, and that creek access could water a small herd if properly managed." Hannah's heart quickened. "Are you offering to stay on as my hired hand?" Lucas turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the dim light. "I'm offering something else entirely if you're willing to hear it." Hannah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. "I've spent my whole life moving from place to place, never staying long enough to put down roots," Lucas said quietly. "But these past days with you, I've found myself thinking about what it would be like to stay, to build something permanent." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Lucas, I know it's sudden," he continued. "I know you still mourn Thomas, and rightfully so. I would never presume to replace him in your heart, but if you could find room there someday for new feelings, I'd like to court you properly, Hannah Greene." Tears welled in Hannah's eyes, not of sadness but of unexpected hope. "I thought I would spend the rest of my life alone," she whispered. "After Thomas died, I couldn't imagine ever feeling anything again except grief." Lucas reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And now," Hannah took a deep breath, acknowledging the warmth that had been growing inside her since the moment Lucas Everett had knocked on her door. "Now I find myself looking forward to tomorrow for the first time in months." Lucas's smile was gentle, patient. "Then that's enough for now. We have time, Hannah. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, with the first stars appearing in the evening sky and the promise of a new beginning hanging between them, Hannah did something she hadn't done since before Thomas fell ill. She hid her face in the curtain of her hair, suddenly shy beneath Lucas's tender gaze. With gentle fingers, Lucas pulled the curtain of hair aside and smiled, his eyes bright with an emotion that mirrored the hope blooming in her own heart. "There you are," he murmured. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah Greene smiled back without reservation, ready to embrace whatever the future might hold.